Good afternoon and welcome to Wednesday at 1. Sorry for the delay. We're having a little technical, no, we're not talking about a technical issue. We're talking about the technician's issue. So sorry that I was not on top of things. So those of you who are here in Zoom, if you would mute your audio so that we don't get any feedback, and I would appreciate that. And we will begin with lighting of the candle. I've gotten to the point now where my candle is burned down far enough that I have to use a wick to light the candle to bring in the light of the world. And yes, Brenda, I have already ordered my new candle. So let's start with a moment of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for the gift of your story. And as we wander through the wilderness with Moses and the Israelites, we are reminded that even when we do not see what is ahead, we know that you are with us, in front of us and behind us and beside us and above us, and just present with us so that we live and breathe and have our being in the midst of you. We lift up to you today our sister Melva as she is in surgery right now, and also our brother Lloyd as he waits in the waiting room, but at least in the hospital. So he's there with her. So we ask you to keep her safe and that she might have a successful surgery and have both hands back free of tremors in the coming weeks. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So, wondering if you guys will be okay with me doing what I'm planning to do, and let me tell you about it. And then if you have any objections, you can go, no. We had kind of wandered into Numbers because there were a couple of things I wanted to look at as we picked up some of the story that doesn't really appear in Exodus. So as we get to the edge of the promised land, the story just kind of dumps. And then the next book is Numbers. And of course, everybody thinks it's just Numbers, which of course, is not true. There's all kinds of cool stuff there. So I went into Numbers for a little bit and just wanted to pick up a couple of the stories from there. So I want to just pick up some highlights from there. There's another 10, 15 chapters in Numbers that really aren't going to add anything to the story that we don't already know. And again, this is one of those where you got one strand telling the story, and then you got a second strand telling the same story with maybe some details, but not a lot of difference. So just wanted to do that, if that's okay with you, is to kind of pick and choose what we take out of Numbers to get finished with that. I want to dump into Deuteronomy for just a minute for the same reason, pick up a couple of things from there. And then we'll get ourselves to the edge of the promised land, poised to go in, so that after Easter, we will start the book of Joshua, where we'll be entering into the promised land. So does that sound like a plan? Are you all really sad that we're going to not read everything in Numbers and Deuteronomy? If I see go like this, if I see sad, no one's sad. Everybody's okay with my agenda and my plan. Okay, good. Thank you. Appreciate that. So if you would turn to, we were supposed to start at 14. And if you actually, why don't you go ahead in your Bible, turn over to 14. If your Bible does not have headings, then don't worry about doing this. But I thought we'll just do a Cliff's Note, through here. I'm not going to read any of it, but just Cliff Notes. I start at 14. The heading I have is The People Rebel. This is following what we did last time, which basically had Joshua and Caleb going into the promised land, seeing the giants, getting all freaked, the other 10 guys who were with them got all freaked out, and they said, no, we don't want to enter in because they're going to squish us if we do that. So now, and then we had Moses kind of, griping to God that the people were not being faithful and, all of that stuff. So the people are rebelling, nothing new. Moses intercedes for the people in the next section, nothing new. But then an attempted invasion is repulsed. So they try to get in to the promised land and they can't do it. So then for some reason, the writer of Numbers decides that we're done for a moment. We're going to pause the story of the people and they're moving, and we're going to talk about stuff they need to know, like how to do various offerings. And you're like, what? How do we get from there to here? But it's ancient documents. That's how we did that. And we talk about the penalty for violating the Sabbath. We talk about fringes on garments. Now your headings may be different from mine, but I think you're gonna, get the similar kind of thing. So at 16, we talk about the revolt of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, which comes to nothing. At 17, we had the budding of Aaron's rod. So we have a little miraculous sign for the people. And then at 18, we have another section of rules and laws on the responsibility of the priests and the Levites. Okay, remembering that Aaron was a Levite. And so Aaron and his descendants are going to be the priests as they move into the land. So they will not receive land, but they'll be scattered throughout all the tribes to be the priests of the tribes. So then we have the priests portion, which I was going to read. You might mark that though, if you want to go back and read that. 18, starting at 8, is kind of just the background for, how we talk about, I talk about the sacrifice of animals being like the biblical predisposition for barbecue. Was that, do I see that hand? But part of that was that, the animal was sacrificed, the blood was spilt, and then the meat went to feed the priests. And this is where this is where God tells them to do that, that the priests get to keep the meat to feed themselves because they don't have land. So, this is their sustenance. They eat and they feed and they receive portions of offerings, both monetary offerings and any of the other offerings that come in, the wheat and the barley, grain offerings, and, they live off of that. So thank you for paying me in money. Appreciate that. Although a chicken now and again wouldn't be too bad. Yes, I see that hand, Miss Brenda.
I remember John's telling me about when he was a little kid that his dad would get food or chickens, turkeys, whatever. He was the youngest of 10. So by then, but that they would get that, that people that was their donation or their offering or whatever. Just made me think of that when you said that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's in fairly modern history that, especially in rural areas. And, I oftentimes in the summertime when people's gardens, just went nuts ball, people would bring extra stuff to the church and give it to me and say, take what you want. And, that too, take what you guys want and then leave the rest and anybody can pick it up at church. That kind of died last year because nobody came to church. So, that would have not have been a good place to share your bounty. But yeah, that's a lot of what happened because people just didn't have money. They had product, produce or animals or something. So I'm very happy to receive portions of my pay in, I don't know, Christmas cookies and cinnamon rolls and all those things that I get,
Well, his dad was a Lutheran pastor. For those who didn't know, that makes sense. It makes more sense why you would get
you have to be Lutheran. If you're not a Lutheran pastor, you don't get this stuff. So.
Didn't get it.
Okay, so at chapter 20, we talk about the waters of Meribah, which was another kind of miraculous spring that they came upon. Passage through the land of Edom is refused, and then we get to the death of Aaron. And that's at chapter 20, verse 22. I just want to read that just for a little bit. 20:22. They set out from Kadesh, and the Israelites, the whole congregation, came to Mount Hor. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor on the border of the land of Edom, let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land that I have given to the Israelites, because you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and his son Eleazar and bring them up Mount Hor. Strip Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar. But Aaron shall be gathered to his people, and he shall die there. Moses did as the Lord had commanded. They went up Mount Hor in the sight of the whole congregation. Moses stripped Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar, and Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain, and when all the congregation saw that Aaron had died, all the house of Israel mourned for Aaron 30 days. Okay, so, we talked about Miriam, got leprosy, but they waited on her to move forward. Last time we talked about that. So Miriam obviously was very honored by the people. And then also now we have, this is where Aaron dies, that Aaron is being honored by the people. So Moses, Aaron, and Miriam were the big three. And if you never figured out that Trinitarian thing going on there between Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, and especially those of you who like the idea, as I do, that the Holy Spirit is a feminine expression of God. So you've got that kind of the Trinitarian leadership, which I think is a wonderful sign that we have in Scripture. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. I think I figured out how to do this. Yay! Okay, so if you can see that map, and can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so here we were at Mount Sinai, where they've been for a long time, where they got the 10 Commandments, and they camped there for quite a while. And then they're moving around, la, 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 la. And now then it says in a different map I have, it says, this is the Friendship Road, the route from Egypt to Arabia. And the Friendship Road was later than the Exodus, but there probably was some entry point here at the top of the Gulf of Aqaba to move into the land of Edom. Okay. And so at this, what happens here is it says that they're refused. They won't let them in. Edom, they stop them there and won't let them come in. So they have to go, around again and come back to the entry point, because this part of the desert, I mean, if you can see here, just topographically, the center area here where it says Sinai is flat. So that's really, like the Sahara. I mean, it's just flat sand, blah, but there's some mountainous region here. So they probably make that loop and then they try again, and they do get in the second time. And they go through Punyan and Zoar into the land of Moab. Okay. Now Moab, remember, was where Jethro was, who was, remember that, how that all works in Abraham's story. But that's just around the Dead Sea now. Just north of the Dead Sea is going to be, Jerusalem, Jericho, all that kind of stuff. So I'll change the map for next time when we start. But I think lots of times people think they get confused about the Dead Sea and the Gulf. So it's like, why didn't they just, come in and go right over to Jericho? Because it's not there. It's way up here. So there are two different bodies of water that get talked about here. And the other thing too is when you talk about how 40 years they came, they tried to take a look, and they got rebuffed and they came back, and then they wandered around for 40 years. I mean, 40 years is still an awful long time, but this is not a day's journey. So this just kind of gives you they kind of made their way to Sinai fairly, not rapidly, but they were making making good progress, just going towards the tip of the peninsula. Why they didn't turn left and go from, directly from Egypt across, just because God was leading them this way with the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke. So, this is the way they went. But then they had to loop around, and this is where they probably spent the 40 years kind of going around and around and around. It's like, have we been here before? I don't know. It looks really familiar. So anyway, just so you got that kind of in your head. And I'm sure you've got a map very similar to that in the Lutheran Study Bible. In fact, you probably have that one. I have this on a piece of paper, and I think it says 2099. So if you're looking at a Lutheran Study Bible, you could open up to that and look. So
I have a question
mhm.
about the death of Aaron.
Yeah.
So is this supposed to be a punishment for him, or?
Well, both, yeah, a little bit, not his death, but I mean, I think it was probably, they're getting old at this point, and Moses isn't going to get in either, So part of this was that when God had said that only Joshua and Caleb would be the only two who started out from Egypt who would go into the promised land. So he's picking off, and I think it's just notable that at this point, I don't think it was a punishment kind of thing as it was, if you hadn't done that, if you had obeyed me, I may have intervened and gotten you into the promised land, but as it is, because you didn't trust me, I'm going to just go ahead and let you die. So, but again, think about, how people thought about their leaders and how they were wanting to tell the story of God's faithfulness, and God, people who trusted in God, made it in, and people who didn't trust, they deserved what they got. They failed to be faithful. And so they didn't make it into the promised land. And it was their fault that they didn't get in, So there's a little moral lesson going on here, by the writers. And Numbers is often, the first 5 books of the Bible used to be that everybody thought Moses wrote all 5 books of the Pentateuch. But, obviously he is going to report his own death, which, I mean, if you got God helping you out with the manuscript, you certainly could do that. But, that's when the scholars started recognizing the different names for God, and kind of the duplication of stuff, and, different pieces of historical information that were coming in and out of these books, pretty much decided that there was more than one writer. And, whether Moses had a hand in it or not, I think a lot of people still think that Moses wrote Deuteronomy, which is a foundational book for the laws going forward. And we call it the Deuteronomistic strand. That's the JEDP strands. We're talking about the Yahwist and the Elohist and the Deuteronomist and the priestly account. And you get to the P, you're going, yeah, there's a word I can say. But Moses, there's not, like, scholars across the board don't say, yeah, that was Moses, but it's the function of Deuteronomy, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. It very well could have been that Moses wrote that, but whether or not Moses was literate is another thing. But again, if you're cooking along and God's inspiring you, God could say, let me help you with your penmanship here. I have an idea. So, okay, so they defeat Arad. They do the bronze serpent in the wilderness, which we've already talked about, the journey to Moab.
Susan,
Yes.
I have a quick question before you go on.
That's okay.
It was one of those that we skipped over about the Sabbath.
Yeah. Give me a number.
Well, it was if you violate the Sabbath.
Okay.
We just kind of skipped over it.
Yeah.
But I have to know.
1532.
Thank you.
They
Our
skipped
research
Study
assistant.
camp.
15. I don't have a 50. Oh, yes, I do. I don't have a 1542.
32.
Oh, 32. Thank you. Let me read it. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses, Aaron, and to the whole congregation. They put him in custody because it was not clear what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him outside the camp. The whole congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Okay, you got a question about that?
Okay.
Your question is?
Was that okay? So they're wandering in the wilderness. Maybe they're being really strict about this, but was that a common punishment for violating the Sabbath?
Stoning?
Yes.
No, it wasn't. And I think this is, again, just, this is an example because he had, at this point, we are under the law, the 10 Commandments, okay, which are there to order the community, to bring order to the community. And the fact that they bring this is a story that it might have been like, where are we going to put this story? Because at some point, Moses he appointed elders to act as judges. So why does the guy who picked up sticks get taken to Moses and Aaron instead of to the elders? So which would tell me this is a pre-existing story that they brought forward, for which I don't know why. But the point being, we're under the umbrella of the law, and anybody who is dissing the law is not only putting themselves in jeopardy, but people around them. It's kind of like wearing a mask. You're not wearing the mask just to protect yourself. You're wearing the mask to protect others around you. So you're not keeping the law just to protect yourself or to restrict yourself, but to keep order in the community. And I think that was a bigger deal than picking up the sticks. Okay. And yes, the stoning for breaking the Sabbath was not a normal, like when we get to Jesus' time and stuff. No. And it's interesting too, because I can't tell you where I got this. So I take it with it, hold this one lightly. In many ways, the Jews were very proud of the fact that they didn't have a death penalty. Okay. And so, when we get into the Passion story and they say, we don't have a law to put a man to death, so we have to take Jesus to Pilate. So Pilate will announce the death sentence because Rome executes people, but we don't execute people. And I'm thinking, well, what the heck? Stoning to death is pretty much execution by mob, rather than by the state. But still, there's a loose connection there. And so I did some reading on that, and it's been a long time ago now, but I seem to recall part of that was the technicality of the fact that the people were doing the stoning and not, Annas or Caiaphas didn't say, I'm going to take this person out and have him killed. They just called the people to stone them. So it was like the people's decision to stone this person. And 9 times out of 10, people didn't die from stoning. But most of the stories that we have in the New Testament about stoning, people die, like Stephen, who was martyred. But women would get stoned for being prostitutes. That one time where Jesus stops them, the woman who was caught in adultery. But they might have just thrown some, depending on who's there and how vicious the mob is, depends on, it certainly could happen, but it wasn't necessarily an execution. It was just we really don't like you for the way you're behaving, so knock it off. Now, as I say, hold that lightly. That's old research that seems to stick in my old brain. So I don't use that in a trivia match, because you might lose, I wouldn't want that to happen. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Okay. So anyway, towards the end, I'm back over at like Numbers 22. We have Balak and Balaam, and that all is just kind of mythic and magical. And so it kind of is an odd group of stuff, which I think if you want to read through it, and then if you have questions next time, I'll be happy to answer them, but it's kind of a distraction as far as I'm concerned. Then we get to the census of the new generation at chapter 26. So there was the plague where lots of people were dying in the wilderness, and that's why they put the snake on the stick and look at the snake and you'll be fine. But now Moses and Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, are going to take a census of the whole congregation. And now we move into, this is the second big census. So we got a chapter or two of how we say numbers. So hence the name of the book. Okay. And then the thing I wanted to read just a little bit was 27 at 12, because now the census has been taken. They're starting anew, kind of a fresh chapter here as they make their way towards the promised land. The Lord said to Moses, go up this mountain of the Abarim range and see the land that I have given to the Israelites. So he gets to go look at it. When you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron was, because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin when the congregation quarreled with me. You did not show my holiness before their eyes at the waters. These are the waters of the Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, "Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint someone over the congregation, who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep without a shepherd." So the Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand upon him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation, and commission him in their sight. You shall give him some of your authority, so that all the congregation of the Israelites may obey. But he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the decision of the Urim before the Lord. At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the Israelites with him, the whole congregation." So Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and had him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole congregation, and laid his hands on him and commissioned him as the Lord had directed through Moses. Okay, so what's happening here is that the Urim, okay, Joshua is not Joshua. Eleazar is the one who's the intermediary here between God and Joshua. Okay, so it's not Eleazar who's just taking the word of Moses or God through Moses about Joshua, but this is like when contemporary times, when a pastor is called for the first call out of seminary, you have to receive a call, and then you can get ordained. Okay, because your calling that you felt when you went to seminary to prepare yourself for ordination is the calling of God, but it needs to be validated by the call of a congregation. Okay, so the people of God have to speak to validate the call that the person feels they're receiving from God. And so God is, the person who is being called feels like they've been called by God, but now we need to have God's verification through God's people in a community. And that's kind of actually what's happening here. And it's one of the reasons we do it still in our system of becoming ordained. So Moses is like, okay, God's telling me that Joshua is the candidate, but I'm not the one I'll give him some of my authority, but I'm not the one who's going to have to convince the people that Joshua is the guy. Okay, so God says, take him to Eleazar, who everyone accepts as the priest, and then he'll do the Urim, which is casting of lots. But it was a religious ceremony, and they believed that God would speak through the casting of the lots. So basically, the validation of Joshua's call to lead the people of Israel is going to come from God through the church, Eleazar, at a casting of lots or a vote that they perceive as God's validation on this calling. So Joshua is basically then we take another break and we talk about all kinds of different offerings. So you might want to dog ear that. If you dog ear pages, I don't know, some of you probably don't do that, but you might want to dog ear numbers 28, 29, and 30 is or actually just 28 and 29, interesting about the way they offered for each of the major festivals. Okay. And so basically, it's just kind of interesting as we go through the year, and you want to go back and kind of say, what did they do originally for this particular festival? And so that's kind of a Cliff's Notes of those kind of things. Just a comment about, okay, I want to read, just because today we're all women. So it's Community Women's Day at Wednesdays at 1. Because the only people I can see on the Zoom are women. So, okay, women, I'm going to read this, chapter 30 in Numbers. Vows made by women. You'll like this. Then Moses said to the heads of the tribes of the Israelites, "This is what the Lord has commanded. When a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth." Okay, so men are supposed to, make good on what they say. When a woman makes a vow to the Lord or binds herself by a pledge while within her father's house in her youth, and her father hears of her vow or her pledge by which she has bound herself and says nothing to her, then all her vows shall stand, and any pledge by which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father expresses disapproval to her at the time that he hears of it, no vow of hers and no pledge by which she has bound herself shall stand. And the Lord will forgive her because her father had expressed to her his disapproval. If she marries, this is a good part. If she marries while obligated by her vows or any thoughtless utterance of her lips by which she has bound herself, and her husband hears of it and says nothing to her at the time that he hears, then her vows shall stand, and her pledges by which she has bound herself shall stand. But if at the time that her husband hears of it, he expresses disapproval of her, then he shall nullify the vow by which she was obligated, or the thoughtless utterance of her lips by which she bound herself, and the Lord will forgive her. But every vow of a widow or of a divorced woman by which she has bound herself shall be binding upon her. And if she made a vow in her husband's house, or bound herself by a pledge with an oath, and her husband heard it and said nothing to her, and did not express disapproval to her, then all her vows shall stand, and any pledge by which she bound herself shall stand. But if her husband nullifies them at the time that he hears them, then whatever proceeds out of her lips concerning her vows or concerning her pledge of herself shall not stand. Her husband has nullified them, and the Lord will forgive her. Any vow or any binding oath to deny herself, her husband may allow to stand, or her husband may nullify. But if her husband says nothing to her from day to day, then he validates all her vows or all her pledges by which she is obligated. He has validated them because he said nothing to her at the time that he heard of them. But if he nullifies them sometime after he has heard of them, then he shall bear her guilt. These are the statutes that the Lord commanded Moses concerning a husband and his wife, and a father and his daughter, while she is still young and in her father's house. Now, this is one of the passages that underscores the fact that women in ancient times, I mean, we always go to the men could say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and they're divorced. Okay. But women could initiate a divorce as well by making a pledge or a vow that her husband overhears. And if he didn't say anything at the time he overhears it, her vow will stand. So this is preparing for, remember when they came to Jesus and they said, if a man divorces his wife, is it legal? Is it okay for a man to divorce his wife? And Jesus says, what did Moses write? And they said, well, he could put her aside. But at that point, they don't say, or she could put him aside. But this is there, so there were circumstances where, I guess men and women were just, really not happy being with one another. And so the way to get out of it by saving face for the man was to just, say she would say something out loud, he would overhear it and he wouldn't refute it. And so between them, then they had agreed that they didn't want to be together. So I just think this is a curious little thing that people don't, really look at when they're talking about making vows and all that. But I think the overriding thing is a woman who is under the protection of her father or her husband really can be, it should be held to her word as long as she's as long as her husband or her father are agreeing with her by not refuting her when they hear it. But once she's out on her own as a widow or as a divorced person, then she has to bear the guilt herself. So it's one hand, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. It's like there's some power given there, but there's also some reality that, when your father's house or your husband's house, you got second, you got the second in command. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting as I was reading along. Anything about that? Comments? Okay. Oh, I just
I
got a
have-
note.
It
Oh, wait a
says in the
second. I
Lutheran
just got a
study,
note from Lloyd that the surgery has ended. Melba was in surgery, so we can change our prayer now to recovery. Okay, go ahead, Melissa.
it says in the Lutheran Study Bible that this is a change from earlier. And what was the change?
Well, if a woman committed adultery, or, if there was some hanky panky going on, it was pretty clear what the Ten Commandments said. But this is just, remember when we went through the section of laws that were kind of rooted in Hammurabi's code? I think when they're talking about that, they're talking about pre-existing rules and guidelines that people lived by that hadn't been codified in any way. So the only codified law that the Mosaic, that the Israelites had were the 10 Commandments at this point. Okay, so Moses is introducing through this, and this is probably duplicated in Deuteronomy, because part of the purpose of Deuteronomy was to give some historical foundation and for Moses to cause all the stuff that they had learned in the wilderness to be part of a foundation of historical action in the future. This is how we live. This is who we are. So this is the time of formative years. The 40 years of being in the wilderness were the formative years for a new people of Israel. They had been slaves for 3 centuries. And so now it's time for them to start to identify who they are as a people. And so some of the concepts and some of the laws that are played out through Deuteronomy are foundational for then what's going to happen in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Kings are all based on some of the philosophies and some of the stuff that's in Deuteronomy, some of the historical what we used to call the former prophets. Okay, so those early historical books, Joshua, Judges, 2 Samuels, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, those grow out of the witness of Deuteronomy. So I think that's what's getting set up here, is some different ways of thinking about things for the people of Israel to use as part of their identity. So, okay, anything else? Okay, so then we move again into war against Midian, return from the war, disposition of captives and booty, conquest and division of the Transjordan, stages of Israel's journey from Egypt. If you would like a roadmap of all the little towns they stopped in and which diners they ate in, you can read this section. I'm kidding. Boundaries of the land, tribal leaders, cities for the Levites, cities of refuge. This is actually, cities of refuges is something that kind of is shot through a bunch of the Old Testament, but I think it's a place where biblically we root the idea of sanctuary, that churches and cities can be sanctuary. Originally, it was done for refuge, so that if someone, had killed someone, either intentionally or unintentionally, and were running from apprehension, that they could go to these certain cities that were designated and take refuge in those cities. And that's an idea that got picked up, over the centuries, and especially when there are places where they have, huge immigration across borders and stuff like we do. The idea of a sanctuary city where people who are fleeing from oppression or violence or whatever, and they're coming in to try to get, what am I trying to say? People coming across the border and they want to come in. It's an A word. I'm getting so old.
Asylum.
Thank you. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much. Thank you so much. So yeah, so if they need asylum, sanctuary cities and sanctuary churches are not supposed to be, that's not what we're talking about. Like we're going to assist like an underground railroad of people who are coming in illegally. some of those who are seeking asylum may come in illegally, but, for those who are truly seeking asylum, sanctuary would be a place where they could, where they could take refuge. Anyway, but that has to be, in modern day, it has to be an intentional action by the community of the congregation to do that kind of work. And obviously you'd have to have a certain kind of mindset in the community to put yourself in that place. Okay, concerning murder and revenge, marriage of female heirs, the end of Numbers. So did you like our little skip through Numbers? Best reading of Numbers I ever did. First reading of Numbers I ever did. Okay, so in the few minutes we've got left, I kind of gave you most of what I wanted to say about Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is, you probably have there's probably a really good introduction of Deuteronomy in the Lutheran Study Bible, and I would suggest you read that, because whereas Genesis and Exodus are kind of, well, Genesis starts out, with the prehistory and then moves into the Joseph cycle. And, the whole last half of Genesis is the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their families, and gets them into Egypt. Then Exodus, they start in Egypt, and the rest of the story is about them getting out of Egypt. Okay, so there's this movement of Abraham and the patriarchy and matriarchy and the families that grow into the people of Israel, how they get themselves to Egypt and slavery, and then how they find themselves in slavery and crying out, and then how they get out of slavery with the promise of the promised land. So we've got Genesis and Exodus. Then Numbers really is census information, but it's also, it's also different pieces of things to be reiterated by a different strand, highly, highly influenced by the priestly account. And then we get to, I'm sorry, I forgot Leviticus. My favorite verses in Leviticus, but Genesis and Exodus, then Leviticus, which is, now that you know the story of how they got out of Egypt and went towards the promised land, how did this religious stuff happen? How did they, so it took them all this time in the wilderness to figure out how they're, they kept saying, we want to go out and worship in the wilderness, we want to go out and to worship, let us out of Egypt, let my people go so we can go and worship. And so eventually that's what God did. God got Pharaoh to let them go, not exactly the way they wanted, but so they escape into the wilderness, and now they can worship. So now they need to create how they're going to be a religious community. And that's what a lot of the time in the wilderness was. The religious part of it, the structural part of it happened before the 12 men went to spy on Canaan, and so they had that all pretty much set, the building of the tabernacle, the setting of the laws, what was going to be built, what was going to be worn, all of that kind of stuff. And then when they traveled from Mount Sinai towards the promised land and had that 40-year pause, that's when all of that was starting to soak in. So it was becoming part of their, part of their DNA, part of their skin, and they were soaking in that. So before they enter into the promised land, they know exactly who they are. So when Deuteronomy is written, it's in a couple of parts, but it really is to identify and to repeat for the record kind of Mosaic law, and all the things that they had learned and all the things that Moses had tried to teach them by speaking to them on behalf of God. What did they learn from the golden calf experience? What did they learn from eating manna every day? What did they learn? What they learned was to depend on God and to be faithful, that God would be faithful, and that in response, they were to be faithful. So Deuteronomy is kind of smushing that all together so that all the really important stuff is going to move forward in the historical documents that are to come. Okay, so Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy is the last of the Pentateuch. And now we're going to move into what we call the history. Okay, just pure history. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 2 Psalms, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, and then we get to Psalms. Okay, so all of that between the Pentateuch and Psalms, if you want to try to remember that, the P and the P. So the end of the Pentateuch to Psalms is the historical record. Okay, written a variety of different times, but basically chronological, with the exception of where you got 2 Chronicles, 2 Kings, 2 Samuel. Those guys are repetitive in the strands. And, as we do the story, that's where you really get, if you can make it through the Pentateuch and you read Joshua and you read Judges and you're like, okay, this is good. This is a story. It's going in a linear fashion. I understand this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And then you get a little story about Ruth, which you're not real sure why it's there, but that's where it is. And then you go into 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And the strands start to repeat and intertwine, and you read a whole story and you're like, okay, and the next step is, and it goes back, like, didn't I just read this? Like 3 chapters. Repeat almost verbatim, and it's really distracting and really annoying, and that's probably where most people stop reading. Because it's like, man, I just must have fallen asleep because I could have sworn I read this, and now it's happening again. It's like deja vu all over again. So anyway, just a heads up on that. But I would like to go ahead then and just there's in Deuteronomy, there's a lot of it, we can skip through it just real quick like we did. A lot of it is, marching orders, starting over, conquests, allotment of the territories, the discipline of faith, articles of the Horeb covenant, invitation to the covenant. This is all reiteration in different ways. Moses' mandate, the Lord alone is Israel's God, Israel and the peoples of Canaan. And then the Lord provides. So we're can you see how this could be like a Sunday school curriculum? It's like we've got these different hunks of stuff that you and I as reader have already read and integrated and say, okay, I get that. But we have to continue to remind the essence of the covenant, the place the Lord will choose. This is all none of this is new information. Warning against apostasy, counteracting sedition, avoiding defilement, tithes, sabbatical year, firstborn of livestock, pilgrimage festivals. I mean, none of this is new. Okay. I mean, it's written differently, but the topics have already been addressed. Administration of justice, kingship, Levitical priesthood, Israel's prophets, cities of refuge, witnesses, conduct of warfare, so this Deuteronomy by itself is kind of, here's the rules of how to be a Jew. Okay. And so there isn't really anything in here. I mean, it's all worth reading. And, if you know, this is a recap and a foundation, then you can read it kind of with a different eye. And maybe sometime we'll just come back and just do Deuteronomy and just kind of say, if we knew nothing about God and we just read Deuteronomy, what would we learn? What would we learn about who God is and who we are and how we're supposed to interact with God? But I'm wanting to move forward in my linear fashion to the next part of the story. So then we got some blessings and some songs, and then Moses' departure. So I want to read to you just chapter 34, which is the very last chapter in Deuteronomy. And then we'll take Holy Week off unless I get a wild hair and decide I want to talk about Holy Week on some, we'll see how Holy Week's unfolding. If everything's done, I may send out a note and say, hey, let's do Wednesdays at 1 and talk about the Passion, like we've never talked about that before. Okay, this is chapter 34 in Deuteronomy. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. The Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command. He was buried in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His sight was unimpaired and his vigor had not abated. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the period of mourning for Moses was ended. Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him, and the Israelites obeyed him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was unequaled for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land, and for all the mighty deeds and all the terrifying displays of power that Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. The end. The beginning. And part one. So pre-promised land. So random questions or thoughts on what we've done? You might, if you do not have in your brain, I would suggest a good thing for you to do in the coming week, or, as we continue on in the Old Testament, is to take a look at the maps in the back and kind of go through the maps from the beginning, trace Abraham's journey, then trace, going to Egypt and coming out of Egypt and coming over to the promised land. Find Jericho, find Jerusalem and Jericho and see where they're distant. Because if you don't have a map in your head as you read, you just check out. I mean, I know I've done it, and over the years now it's gotten easier because I read a lot of Bible, but if you don't, when I say the Sea of Galilee, if you don't immediately know that that's north, in the north of, what's the northern kingdom, what's the southern kingdom, I think some geography is always really helpful. So, you might try to look at, and don't look at a modern map because that'll really mess you up. But look at the maps in the back of, your Lutheran Study Bible maps are going to be great. So take a look at those, and they should start at the very, with Abraham and some of the early stuff, and then move forward. Because as we move into the promised land and the divided kingdoms and coming up to David, it's going to be really important for you to have kind of a picture in your head, or get yourself a really good map and stick it on the wall behind your computer so that you can be looking at it as we're talking. Yeah, Melissa, did you have a comment?
Wasn't Moses's wife dead already?
I think so. Who was Moses's wife? I don't know. Do we know?
Rebecca?
No,
No.
that was Jacob.
Anyway, well, the reason I asked is because it said his vigor had not abated. And I'm thinking, I thought his wife died. So how did they know his vigor's unabated?
I think that's just one of those things that's like he was still active, or he considered he could still, if he wanted to, he could have made a baby, so everything still worked. Because I think that was part of it, part of being able to be, vital was to be able to procreate. And so, the same way it was just terrible sad if a woman was barren, it would be terrible, even worse sad if a man was sterile, or or no longer able to perform, and to be able to I'm trying to think of another. It's not asylum. It's complete the process, let's just say. So yeah, and we see that in a lot of when they talk about the older men, like Abraham was 90 years old and he was still, he still had moisture, or there are all these little kind of euphemisms that they used to say that he could have been or was continuing to be sexually viable.
Wasn't Zipporah Moses' wife?
Yes, thank you. At least one of them. Wait, where's Pam when we need her? Where's my Google person? Okay. Anything else? Well, we got 2 minutes. Stump the pastor. Any question? What do you want? Oh, Don, I didn't see you in the back there. I'm sorry when I was talking about Community Women's Day.
Zipporah was the only one.
Okay. Oh, so he was sad.
He was
But he
devoted to her.
But he could have if he wanted to.
Right. And he became devoted to his prophetic mission, and he never got married again. So
Yay. What a guy. What a great guy. Okay. Well, folks, thank you so very much. Lots coming up this week. You should have, while we were talking or right before we started, I know Brenda threw out the blast, the Wednesday email. So all the particulars of Holy Week are on there with an attachment. So please read that stuff carefully. And especially if you're planning to come in person at any point, read carefully about those particular services, because Palm Sunday, we're going to start outside unless it's raining. We're going to start outside and come in. Easter morning, we're going to start inside and go out. The vigil and the early morning Eucharist Easter morning will be out, by the fire pit. So, don't just expect you're going to come over and go into the church and call, like in the olden days. It's a new world. So, okay. You got any questions, where Brenda and I live, you can send us a note or a text or give us a call. All righty. Okay. Thanks, folks. I will see some of you tomorrow night for the last cast discussion for right now. And if I don't see your Zoom faces, I will see you in person, or I will see you on the other side of Holy Week. Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.